There's a particular silence a woman learns to live inside. It isn't the quiet of an empty house. It's the quiet that comes right after someone looks at her, decides something about her, and looks away. She learns to hear that silence coming. She learns to arrive at it first, so it can't surprise her. Della Hart had lived inside that silence for 11 years, long enough that she'd stopped calling it a wound and started calling it the truth about herself. Unlovable. Not because anyone had shouted it, because they'd all been so gentle about it. Gentle the way you are with something already broken. She came west believing the desert might be the one place empty enough to match her. No neighbors to whisper. No church pew where the other women's arms were always full and hers were always folded. Just dust and distance, and a man who'd written that he wasn't particular. She never expected the cowboy who pulled her out of the flood to be particular about the one thing every other man had thrown away. This is the story of the year Della Hart stopped arriving at the silence first. And the man who, God help them both, refused to look away. Stay with me till the end, because what he does in the last part, I still can't tell it without stopping halfway. The wagon was already going over when I came around the bend, and there's a sound a loaded wagon makes in fast water that I have not been able to unhear in the 22 years since. It groans first. Then it screams, not the horse, the wood, the boards pulling their nails like a mouth pulling teeth. Then it goes quiet, and the quiet is worse, because the quiet means the water's got it now and the water doesn't argue. I dropped the rein I was mending and I ran. Now I ought to say plain so you don't build me up into something I'm not. I am not a brave man. I've been told I am, mostly by people who weren't there, and I've learned to let them keep the version they like. But that afternoon I wasn't thinking about brave. I was thinking about the flat brown shine of the wash where an hour ago there'd been dry sand, and how a body goes under and doesn't come back up in that kind of water, and how I'd already stood at 3 gravesides that spring for people the desert had simply kept. So I ran, and I hollered something with no words in it, and I went into the wash with my boots on, which anybody raised out here will tell you is a fine way to make 2 funerals out of one. Cold. I remember the cold most. Snowmelt off the Rincons, no business being that cold in June, and it hit me at the belt and tried to take my legs out from under me like a bad-tempered mule. The wagon was tipped on its side, wheels turning slow in the current, and I saw her hand before I saw her. That's a thing I've never told anybody. I saw her hand first, reaching up out of the canvas where the load had shifted and pinned her, fingers spread, and it wasn't grabbing at anything. It was just open. Open the way you hold a hand out when you've already stopped expecting anyone to take it. I took it. I got her up onto the bank, and we lay there in the mud like 2 things the flood had spat back, both of us heaving, and the first clear thing I registered about Della Hart was that she was apologizing. I'm sorry, she was saying, between the water she was coughing up. I'm sorry, the trunk, I've made such a... Ma'am, I got a hand on her shoulder. Ma'am, you're breathing, that's the whole list. Everything else can wait. She looked at me then, and I'll be honest, she looked at me the way a dog looks at a raised hand, even when the hand's only reaching to pet it. Flinched ready, braced for the cost of being trouble. I didn't understand it that day. I filed it away the way I file everything away. I've kept a little pocketbook my whole life, whether mostly prices, the day the first quail hatched, the day my father's watch stopped and I never wound it right again. I keep track of things so I don't have to keep them in my chest. That evening I'd write, woman off the Benson Road, wagon lost, alive, apologized 11 times, I counted. That's the kind of fool I am. She was maybe 30. Dark hair come loose and plastered down one side of her face, a face that would have been called handsome if it ever let itself finish an expression. Every look she started, she stopped, like she'd been taught looks were expensive. Where were you headed? I asked once we could both talk. Reddington. She wrung her sleeve without seeming to know she was doing it. There's a man there, Mr. Alt. He keeps the mercantile. We're a pause you could have driven a wagon through. We have an arrangement. I knew Sela's alt. Everybody knew Sela's alt. And I knew, the way you know a rock's going to be hot before you touch it, that whatever arrangement had put this woman on that road was going to break her heart before the month was out. But that's getting ahead. I got her up on my horse. Her trunk was 3 miles downstream by then, or under the sand, and everything she owned in this world had gone with it except the wet clothes on her back, and I found out later, a small tin she'd had inside her coat, held against her ribs the whole time in the water. She wouldn't say what was in it. Held it like the flood might come back for its special. We rode for my place because it was the near one and the light was going. I felt her behind me, not touching me, keeping a careful 2 inches of air between us, even riding double, and I thought, there's a woman who has taught herself to take up no room at all. My sister Cora runs my house, which is a mercy for everyone, seeing as I run it about like I run my hair. Cora's a widow twice over and has opinions about the number twice, and she took one look at Della, heart dripping in my doorway, and did what our mother would have done, put the kettle on and asked no questions she could answer herself. "Riddington bride," Cora said to me low in the lean-to, while Della changed into borrowed dry things by the fire. It wasn't a question. "How'd you?" "Trunken Noring, coming to somebody not from, and that face." Cora pressed her lips flat. "Eli, that's a face that's been sent back before." I didn't know what she meant. I said so. Cora looked at me the way she does when I've confirmed I'm the dumb one, gentle-like, and said, "Some women get sent for. Some women get sent back. You can tell the difference in how they hold their own hands." And she went in to feed the woman soup. Della stayed the night, and then another, on account of the wash, stayed up, and the road to Riddington was gone. Propriety we handled by Cora's presence, which is armor enough to satisfy any church in the territory. And in those 2 days I learned the shape of her the way you learn the shape of a room in the dark, bumping into edges. She couldn't sit idle. Cora would set down a mending basket across the room, and Della'd have it half done before Cora turned around. She swept corners that were already swept. She fixed the door I'd been meaning to fix for a year, actually fixed it, planed it down with my own tools and set it hanging true, and when I came in and it didn't scrape, she went pale like she'd been caught at something. "I should have asked," she said. "I overstep. I'll pay for the—" Della, first time I used her given name, it stopped her cold. "The door's better, that's the whole of it. The door's better, and I'm obliged." She stood there holding my plane in 2 hands, and for just a second, one of those looks she always cut off got all the way finished. Something surprised and young came up in her face, like a person hearing their own name called kind for the first time in a long while. Then she put it away, set the plane down careful, squared it to the bench, and went back to being sorry. I wrote that night, fixed my door without asking, apologized for improving my house, and under it because I couldn't help it. Who taught her that? I found out on the 3rd day, and I found out the way you find out the worst things, sideways, by accident, from someone who thought you already knew. Alt sent a boy. Alt himself didn't come, which tells you the caliber of the man, but he sent a boy up from Riddington on a borrowed mule with a note. And the note I didn't read because it wasn't mine, but Della read it standing in the yard, and I watched the thing happen to her that I'd been braced for since the riverbank. She didn't cry. That's the part that stayed with me. A woman gets a note that unmakes her whole reason for crossing a territory, and she doesn't cry, she just settles, the way a house settles, some load coming down through her all at once and finding the ground. She folded the note into a small square, then smaller. Then she looked at the mule boy and said, "Is there a return message?" in a voice so level and so ruined that the boy, who was maybe 14, took his hat off. Didn't know why, just did. "He says," the boy swallowed, "he says he heard from the Wilcox folks, about Kansas. He says he can't, he says a man in his position needs," the boy couldn't finish it, To his everlasting credit, at 14, he could not make his mouth say the word. Della said it for him, gently. She was gentle with everyone but herself. "Children," she said. "A man in his position needs children." She smoothed the folded note flat against her palm. "Thank you. Tell Mr. Alt I understand. Tell him I'm not surprised. Tell him I'm not surprised. I have hated few sentences in my life the way I hate that one. Because you don't say I'm not surprised the first time. Or the second. You say it when it's become the weather of your life. When rejection has stopped being an event and turned into a season you know is coming by the slant of the light." The boy left. Cora came out and put an arm around her, and Della let herself be held for exactly as long as politeness required, and then stepped out of it, squared herself, and said, "I'll need to arrange transport back to Wilcox. I can pay. Not much, but I can. I don't want to be a burden. I've been enough of a—" And I heard myself say, from over by the fence, before my brain had voted on it, "Stay through the branding." They both looked at me. I don't do things fast. Ask anyone. I'm the man who lets a door scrape for a year. But something about "tell him I'm not surprised" had gotten in under my ribs and set my father's stopped watch to ticking in there where it had no right to. "We're short-handed," I said, which was true. "Cora's hands are bad this year. The cooking for the branding crew is more than she can carry alone, and you—" I nodded at the door she'd hung true at the mending done at all of it. "You work like 3 people trying to disappear. I can pay wages. Real ones. Stay through the branding, put money by, go back to Wilcox on your own terms stead of Alt's. That's all. That's the whole offer." I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds, and it wasn't that. Not yet. I'd known the woman 3 days. I'm telling you it was closer to the feeling you get seeing a good horse mistreated. A plain refusal to watch waste happen in front of you when you've got a hand free to stop it. Della studied me a long moment. Looking, I think now, for the trick, for the second shoe, for the part where the kindness turns out to have a price tag she can't afford. She'd learned that kindness was a loan and the interest was cruel. "Why?" she said, not a question, a test. And I gave her the truest answer I had, which was, "Because the door's better and I'm obliged, and I've buried enough this spring." She stayed. "Now I have to tell you about Sits with Thunder, and I have to tell you right, because she's the one who saw it before I did, and because I've heard too many men tell these stories wrong. Her people are Chiricahua. She wasn't from my land and she didn't belong to it. Nobody belongs to that country, whatever the deeds say. But she came through twice a year with her son and her son's family, trading, and we'd had an understanding since before my father died. Good baskets, better than good. A woman who could read weather off a sky I couldn't, and a way of being still that made my own restlessness feel like the loud thing it was. Her English was better than my Apache, which is to say she was patient with a fool. I called her by the name she gave me to use. She called me, near as I could tell, something that meant the one who counts, on account of the pocketbook. She thought it was funny. She wasn't wrong. She came through the week Della started, and she watched Della work the fire pit for the branding crew. Della had thrown herself at that fire the way she threw herself at everything. Cooking for 12 men like the cooking was the thing standing between her and the flood, and Sits with Thunder watched her a good while. And then she said to me, quiet, in the mix of both our tongues we used, "That one is carrying something in a tin." I about dropped my coffee. "How'd you—" Della had never once let that tin out of her sight, kept it in her apron. I'd told nobody. "Not the tin, I mean." Sits with Thunder wasn't looking at Della's apron. She was looking at Della's face. "She carries a dead thing she is not allowed to bury. Your people don't let your women bury the ones that never got born. So they carry them, in a tin, in the chest, forever." She turned her old dark eyes on me, and there was no unkindness in them, only a plain reckoning. "You should not have offered her the branding, the one who counts. Now she will let herself want to stay, and wanting to stay is a worse cut than any road." "She's just working through a season," I said. Sits with Thunder made a sound my grandmother used to make. The sound that means you poor simple child. And she went back to her baskets and said no more, because she'd said the whole of it, and it wasn't her way to repeat herself for a man too slow to hear it the first time. I wrote nothing that night. First night in years I didn't write. I've thought about that. The tin. I found out what was in the tin because of the coyote. It was maybe 2 weeks in. Branding done, crew paid and gone, and the ranch settling into that hollow, ringing quiet that comes after a lot of men and animals leave a place. Della had earned her wages and then some, and there'd been no more talk of Wilcox, and neither of us was fool enough to bring it up, and Cora watched the two of us not bringing it up with an expression I chose not to interpret. There was a coyote had been coming to the yard. Bold thing, mange down one side, and it'd taken a hen, and I'd set out to shoot it because that's the arithmetic of a ranch. One coyote against a flock, the coyote loses. I had it in my sights at dusk by the woodpile. And Della came out of the house and stood between me and it. Not on purpose. She'd come to fetch wood and hadn't seen the gun, and by the time she registered the whole scene the coyote had bolted, and I lowered the rifle, and she looked at the empty place where the coyote had been and then at me, and something in her just came apart. Right there. The thing she'd held level since Alt's note. The whole level thing. "It's got young," she said, her voice shaking. "Down in the wash bank. I've seen her carrying to it. She's not thieving, she's feeding them, she's..." And then she wasn't talking about the coyote anymore. I don't think either of us knew when the switch happened. "She's got something to feed, she gets to have something to feed, and you were going to just..." And she sat down in the wood chips, in her good apron, and she took out the tin. I came and sat down too. Slow, the way you approach anything that's decided you're a threat. She opened it in her lap. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of blue flannel gone soft with handling, was a tiny knitted thing. A booty. One booty, no bigger than my thumb, cream-colored wool yellowed at the toe, and a lock of hair tied with thread, and a scrap of paper with a date on it and a name, a girl's name, in a young woman's hand. 19, she said, staring at it. I was 19. She lived 4 days, a breath. The doctor said after he said there'd not be more, said it plain like a weather report. And my husband, the word came out of her like a stone out of a boot. My husband was kind about it for 1 year, and then he wasn't, and then he was gone, and every man since has been kind about it right up until the moment it costs them something, and then she looked at me. Wet-faced, wrecked, and furious, which I hadn't seen in her yet, the fury, and it was the most alive she'd looked since the riverbank. I made the booty for her. I only ever finished one. I keep meaning to finish the other. 12 years I've been meaning to finish the other one. I didn't say she was brave. I want you to know I didn't say one word about brave, or about God's plan, or about how there was still time, or any of the things men say to women to make the woman's grief more comfortable for the man. Sits with Thunder's words were in me. A dead thing she is not allowed to bury. I said, what was her name? Della blinked, like nobody had ever asked. Nobody asks that, she whispered. They ask how I am, they ask am I healing, they ask have I made my peace. Nobody asks her name. I'm asking her name. Ruth, she said. And she broke all the way open, finally, 12 years of it in the wood chips over one yellowed booty. And I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was to sit close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone in it, and not 1 inch closer, and let her. The coyote came back that night, took nothing, just crossed the yard in the moon like it was passing through. I never did shoot it, couldn't have told you why then. I know why now. Here's the thing I have to leave you on, and then I'll hush till you want the rest. Later that night, after Della'd cried herself out and Cora had put her to bed and the house had gone dark, I sat up with my pocketbook and my father's dead watch, and I found I couldn't write the day down, kept starting. Della opened the tin, crossed it out, found out about the baby, crossed it out. Nothing I wrote was the true size of the thing. Because here's what I'd figured out sitting in the wood chips. Every man who'd ever met Della Hart had done arithmetic on her. Alt did. Her husband did. The whole territory did. A woman who can't give children is worth this much less. And they'd all come out with the same sum, and she'd learned to do the arithmetic herself before they could, so it wouldn't hurt as bad when the number came up short. And I sat there with my dead man's watch that I keep even though it doesn't tell time, that I keep for no earthly use, that I keep because it was my father's and I loved him, and I thought, I have never once done arithmetic on this watch. I have never once asked what it's worth. You don't. Not with the things you love. Love is the one place a man stops counting. Me, the one who counts, sitting there realizing I'd found the single thing I didn't want away. I wound the watch, first time in 11 years. It didn't tick, it's broke. That's not a miracle story, but I wound it anyway, and I sat in the dark holding it, and I understood I was in a great deal of trouble. Because I'd known her 1 month. And I already knew that when the season turned and she started talking about Wilcox again, I wasn't going to be able to. Summer went a fall the way it does out here, which is to say it didn't. Right up until the morning it did, one cold dawn, and the cottonwoods down the wash had turned the color of a struck match overnight. And I stood on the porch with my coffee and thought, without meaning to, she's still here. That was the trouble with the whole of that autumn. It kept sneaking up on me in the middle of ordinary sentences. Della had been on the place 4 months by then, and neither of us had said the word Wilcox since the woodpile. We'd built a kind of quiet around it, the way you build a fence around a well, not to keep the water in, just to keep from falling down the hole by accident in the dark. She worked. I worked. Cora ran the house and watched us both with the particular patience of a woman who has buried 2 husbands and therefore has no time left for people being slow about their own happiness. Some things I wrote in the pocketbook that fall, exactly as I wrote them. Sep 9 D taught the bay mare to stand for the farrier. Mare never stood for me. D hums when she thinks no one hears. Off key. I have started leaving the barn door open. Sep 21 found the second booty. She has started it. 1 row, then unpicked it. The wool by her chair, needles crossed over it like a grave marker. I said nothing. That one I looked at a long time. She'd carried that single booty 12 years and never made the pair. And here in my house some evening when she thought the room was empty, she'd cast on the second one 1 row and then pulled it out again, because to finish it would be to say something she wasn't ready to say. That the ache had a future in it and not only a past. I understood pulling out the row. God knows I understood it. I'd wound a dead watch and then set it down 100 times. We were 2 people standing at the edge of a thing, both of us with our boots full of every reason to run. And then the car place caught the fever, and none of our reasons mattered anymore. Word came up from the flats with the Peterson boy, riding hard, and word like that in this country is always the same 3 words underneath whatever the actual words are. Somebody needs help. The cars had it, the summer fever, the kind that comes up out of standing water and takes a household in a week. Tom Carr and his wife Alta had a homestead 8 miles south, poor as dirt and twice as stubborn, and they had 1 child, a boy of about 5, and the Peterson boy said the smoke wasn't right off their chimney, hadn't been for 2 days and been able to raise them. I saddled up. Della was already pulling on her coat. "You're not," I said. She looked at me, just looked. And I want to tell you I stood my ground like a sensible man, but the truth is that look had a whole argument folded up inside it, and the argument was, you do not get to decide, from all your health and all your safety, which dying people I am allowed to go to. Not me. Not with my history of being kept away from the ones I could have loved. She didn't say a word of it. She got her medicine bag, she'd made herself one over the summer, out of things she knew, and she got on the mare, and I did not stop her, and I have thanked God more than once that I didn't. Cora caught my sleeve at the gate. "Whatever's down there," she said low, "you bring it home careful, both of you." She wasn't only talking about the fever. Cora is never only talking about the one thing. I will not walk you through the car house. Some things a man carries in his own tin and doesn't open for company. I'll tell you only that we were too late for Tom and too late for Alta, and that Della went through that reeking dark house calling out in a steady voice, room by room, while I stood in the doorway with my heart trying to climb up out of my mouth, and that it was Della who found the boy. He was under the bed. He'd been under the bed, best we could figure, the better part of 2 days. His mother had put him there. You could see it in how it was arranged: a blanket, a tin cup of water gone stale, a corn-shuck doll tucked in beside him. Alta Carr, dying, burning up, had made her boy a nest under the bed where the fever air was lowest and coolest, had given him water and his doll and told him, we had to guess, to stay, to be quiet and stay. And then she'd gone back to her own bed to die where he couldn't watch it happen. That's a mother, Bye. I need you to hear me say it, because this story has a lot to say about who gets to be one. That is a mother. Down to the last 4 days of her, arranging the world so her child would suffer as little as her death allowed. The boy didn't cry when Della drew him out, didn't make a sound. Just held that corn-shuck doll and stared at us with eyes that had already seen the whole of it and found no words big enough. And I understood before Della even said it that this child had gone somewhere back inside himself and pulled the door shut. He's not sick, Della said, hands moving over him and her voice cracked clean in half on the word sick. He's not sick, Eli. It passed him. It passed him. She gathered him up, 5 years old and light as a bird from 2 days of nothing, and he let her, and she pressed her face into his filthy hair and made a sound I hadn't heard from her before and haven't the words to set down. Sits with Thunder was camped up the ridge that week. It was her season through. She met us on the road home like she'd known. She has a way of knowing, and she rode alongside and looked at the boy a long while, and then she said to Della, not to me. That one has locked his voice up. He put it somewhere safe, the way his mother put him somewhere safe. She reached over without hurry and laid 2 fingers against the boy's cheek, and he didn't flinch from her the way he flinched from me. He will bring it back out when he trusts the room he's in, not before. Do not go digging for it. A voice that is dragged out too soon does not come back whole. She looked at Della then, and there was something in her old face I couldn't name, something between warning and blessing. You know how to wait for a buried thing. You have been waiting for one for 12 years. A pause. Perhaps this is why you were kept empty, so there would be room. Della couldn't answer, held the boy tighter, and Sits with Thunder rode with us in silence the rest of the way, which from her was a kind of standing guard. We didn't know his name. That was the first hard thing, and it turned out to be the smallest. The Carrs had no kin anybody knew of. Tom had come out from Missouri with a grudge and a wife and no forwarding address for his past. There were papers to be found eventually, and a circuit judge to be satisfied come spring, and a whole slow machinery of the county that would grind toward the question of what to do with a mute orphan boy. But that was all winter away, and winter is a long negotiation out here. And in the meantime there was a child in my house who woke screaming without sound, his mouth wide open and nothing coming out, which is the worst thing I have ever had to stand and witness. A scream with the sound taken out of it. Della would be up the ladder to the loft before I'd got my boots half on, every single time, gathering him, rocking him, humming that off-key hum against his hair until the shape of the scream went out of him. She named him after a fashion. She didn't presume. She'd say, hey, you, soft, and there now, little man, and one evening watching him line up pebbles on the hearth in a careful row. He was always making rows, orders, small controlled worlds where nothing could get in, she said, half to herself. You're a patient soul, aren't you? Patient as Job. And it stuck sideways the way names do. Job. We called him Job, and if you know your scripture you'll know it's a heavy name to hang on a 5-year-old. The man who lost everything and kept his faith. But the boy answered to it, turned his head to it. And after a while I stopped hearing the weight of it and heard only the boy. Here is what I watched happen that fall, and I set it down plain because it is the center of everything. I watched Della Hart, who had spent 11 years being told and telling herself that she was not made to mother, Mother that broken child with a competence that stopped my breath. Not softness, or not only softness. Competence. She knew how far to let him fall before she caught him. She knew that pushing food at a starved child scares him, and that setting it near and turning away invites him. She knew to let him keep the filthy corn-shuck doll, though it was surely full of fever, because you do not take the last thing from a child who has lost all the rest. You let the doctor's arithmetic lose to the child's need. The same arithmetic she'd shown me at the woodpile. Only now she was on the winning side of it. She knew, without being told, all the things that 11 years of being kept away from children could not teach her, but that something older and truer in her had known all along. I wrote Act 3, she is not learning to mother him, she already knew. 12 years she has known and no one would let her prove it. Alt, her husband, the whole D in territory doing sums on her. I crossed out the curse because Cora reads my book sometimes. Then I wrote it back in, because some things earn the word. And the boy job, the first sign came in late October. Della was at the stove and he was at her hip, always at her hip now, a small silent shadow, and she reached up to a high shelf and a crock slipped and she said, "Oh," and grabbed for it and missed, and it smashed on the floor loud as a shot. And the boy laughed. No sound to it still. But the shape of it, the open mouth, the crinkled eyes, the shaking shoulders, the pure delighted 5-year-old glee at a grown-up dropping something. It was a laugh in every particular but the noise, and Della went absolutely still over the broken crock, and then she got down on the floor amongst the pieces and she laughed too, out loud, for both of them, and the boy watched her laugh his laugh for him and laughed harder. And I stood in the doorway with an armload of firewood, and could not for the life of me have moved. That's the day I decided. If you want to know, that's the exact day, a broken crock and a soundless laugh. I need to tell you about the town, because the town is where the second hard thing lived, and the town is where I learned what Della had been braced against her whole life long. I had to go into Reddington in November for winter stores, and Della came, and Job came because he would not be parted from her and she would not make him, and we made a day of it, the three of us, which if you'd shown me that picture in June I'd have said you had the wrong man's life. And in the mercantile, Alt's mercantile, though Alt had the sense to stay in his back room, I was at the counter counting out for flour and I heard them. 2 women by the dry goods. They weren't quiet about it because they didn't think they needed to be. That's the thing about small-town cruelty. It doesn't lower its voice, because it's never once been made to. The Cowboy playing house with the Cowboy, well, you know she's the one Alt sent back. Baron, I heard. Baron, yes. Kansas trouble too, they say. And now she's got herself a ready-made child she didn't have to, a little laugh, the kind that's worse than a slap, didn't have to earn if you follow. Some women'll take a shortcut to what God saw fit to. I turned around. I don't remember deciding to. I had a temper as a young man and spent 30 years teaching it to lie down, and it stood up in me then like it had never learned a thing. But Della's hand was on my arm. She'd heard. Of course she'd heard. She'd been hearing that exact sentence her whole life, in 100 mouths, and she knew its every turn before it finished. And her hand was on my arm not to hold me back for her own sake. I understood this later, turning it over, but because Job was between us, holding her skirt, and a child does not need to watch the man of his house go to war in a store, does not need one more loud broken thing. And Della Hart, even then, even with those words landing on the oldest wound she had, was thinking of the boy before herself. She looked at those 2 women, and she did the thing I will love her for until I'm in the ground next to my father and his watch. She did not shrink, and she did not spit fire. She simply held the boy's hand a little more visibly, and she said, in a voice pitched to carry exactly as far as theirs had, "His name is Job, and he's mine to keep from harm. You'd know his mother did the same if you'd ever met her. She was braver than this whole town." And she walked out, head level, boy's hand in hers, and left the two of them standing there with their mouths open around a cruelty that had, for once, found someone who would not agree to be smaller for it. I paid for the flour. My hands weren't steady. Outside in the wagon, Della was staring straight ahead down the road, jaw set, and Job was on her lap with his doll, and I climbed up and took the reins and didn't cluck the horses yet. "Della, don't," she said, "please. If you're kind to me right now, I'll come apart, and I can't, not with him here. So please just drive." I drove. We were a mile out of town, cottonwoods going by before she said, so quiet I nearly lost it under the wheels. "The terrible thing is they're right about the shortcut. I didn't earn him. I didn't carry him or birth him or bleed for him. He fell into my arms out of another woman's dying. And I love him so much I can't breathe with it, and I keep thinking, what right? What right have I? I've got no right to a joy I didn't pay the full price for." And I pulled the horses up right there in the road by, stopped them dead. Because I'd finally found the one thing I knew for certain, the one sum I'd worked all my life without knowing I was working it. "Della Hart," I turned to face her. Job looked up at me with his mother's arrangement of patience in his little face. "You listen, I've kept a book my whole life. Whether prices, births, deaths, every D and thing that can be counted, I've counted it. And here's the one thing 30 years of counting taught me." My voice wasn't steady either now. "The things that matter don't come to you because you earned them. They come to you because you're standing in the place where they fall with your arms open when everybody else has theirs folded. You didn't earn that, boy. Nobody earns a child. My father didn't earn me. You were the one with your arms open. In the whole cruel county, I had to stop, started again. There's no shortcut to love. There's only who's willing to be in the road when it comes through." She was crying now, quiet, the boy patting her face with one small hand, worried. "I know a woman," she said, wet, wrecked, and almost laughing, "who's told herself the exact opposite thing every day for 11 years. "I know," I said. I aimed to spend a while contradicting her. And that is when the arithmetic turned all the way over in me, and I knew I was going to ask her to stay. Not through the branding, not through the winter. To stay. To marry a slow fool with a dead watch and a barn door I couldn't fix myself. I had the whole of it ready in my chest by the time we got home. Which is exactly, of course, when the letter was waiting. Cora met us at the gate holding it like it might bite, and her face told me before the paper did. It had come up from the county seat on the mail rider, official, a seal, and I watched Della read it, standing in the yard with the boy on her hip, in the very same spot she'd stood to read Alt's note back in June, the very same spot, and I hadn't planned that, and neither had God as far as I know, but there it was, the poetry of it, cruel as the town women. Only this time she didn't settle. This time she read it and she went white, and she pulled the boy in tighter, and she said, "No," out loud once, flat, to nobody, to the paper, to the county, to the whole machinery. There was Ken, a brother of Tom Carr's back in Missouri, tracked down by the county's slow grinding, a married brother, with a wife who'd borne 4 living children and could raise a 5th, the letter said, in a proper household with bloodkin, which the court would surely find preferable to. And here the letter used a phrase, an official phrase, and I watched it go into Della like a blade, preferable to placement with an unrelated widow of uncertain circumstance. Uncertain circumstance. 11 years by. 11 years of being weighed and found short, and here it was again, in a county seal in the driest possible ink. A woman like her was an uncertain circumstance, and a stranger with the right blood and the right number of living children was preferable. And the boy Job, the boy who laughed without sound and slept only when she was near, and had chosen, out of a whole world that had failed him, to trust the room she was in. The boy was to be sent to Missouri in the spring, to the blood that hadn't come for him, away from the arms that had. And Della stood in the yard holding him, and looked at me over his head, and said the thing that broke me worse than anything in the Fever House. "Tell them I understand," her voice level. Terribly, terribly level, the old level coming back down over her like a lid. Tell them I'm not. Tell them I'm not surprised. She didn't finish it. She couldn't. She'd promised me a whole summer of finished sentences, and this was the one she couldn't get to the end of, and Job looked up at the sound of her voice going strange and reached up and patted her cheek, and I swear this on my father's watch, I swear it. Opened his mouth. He said, "Ma." Not clear, not whole. A cracked, rusted-hinge sound from a throat that hadn't made a word in 2 months, so soft that if the yard hadn't gone dead silent around it, we'd have missed the single most important sound of my whole life. His hand on Della's wet cheek, the county letter still fluttering in her other hand, and out of that boy came one broken syllable he'd been keeping somewhere safe. "Ma." Della went down on her knees in the dirt. Not felt chose, got herself down to his height fast so she wouldn't tower over the moment. And she didn't grab him, didn't crush him, didn't do any of the things a lesser-loving woman would have done. She held very still, the way Sits with Thunder had taught her without teaching her, the way you hold still for a wild thing that has decided, against all its evidence, to come to your hand. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here, little man." And he said it again, "Ma," surer this time, and then a whole cracked flood of sounds behind it, not words yet, just the noise of a boy, the ordinary blessed racket of a 5-year-old who has finally decided the room is safe. 2 months of silence coming out all at once. He cried. Out loud. First time we'd heard him cry with sound in it, and it was the best sound in the territory, and Della held him and rocked, and Cora had her apron to her face, and I stood there with a county letter's worth of grief in the air, and a boy calling her Ma. And I understood 2 things at the exact same moment, the way you understand the ground, and the drop at the edge of a cliff. 1, this boy was hers. Blood or no blood, court or no court, seal or no seal, hers. 2, a piece of paper from the county seat was going to take him to Missouri in the spring anyway. And I was a slow man with a dead watch who had, until that afternoon, believed that the world's arithmetic could be outweighted, that if you were only patient and kind enough, the sums came right on their own. I stopped believing that in the yard. It's the last thing I ever unlearned. I didn't sleep. I sat up with the pocketbook and I did not write in it. I did something else. I did sums, real ones, the kind I'm actually good at. I counted what I had. 240 acres, most of it rock, 40 head, a name in the county that was respected if not rich. And a thing I'd never once spent in 50 years because I'd never had a reason big enough. Standing. The plain, heavy standing of a settled man with land and a dead father folks had liked. By dawn I had a plan, and the plan was the most frightening thing I'd ever carried because it required me to be loud. To go to the county seat and stand up in front of the judge and men who counted for a living and argue that their arithmetic was wrong. Me, the one who counts, going to uncount a child out of the wrong column. But first, there was a thing I had to do that was more frightening than the judge, and I want to set it down honest because I did it badly. I found Della at the woodpile after breakfast, the same woodpile. This story keeps circling its own graves, and Job was napping for once, worn out from finding his voice, and I stood there turning my hat in my hands like a boy of 16, and I said, "Della, I've got no gift for this, and I'm going to do it wrong, so I'll just..." And then I said it wrong. Marry me, not for the boy. I mean for the boy too. A married household counts more to a judge than but that's not, I'm saying it in the wrong order. I stopped, started over, got it right. I'm saying I love you and I've loved you since you fixed my door without asking. And the boy is a reason, but he's not the reason. You're the reason. And I would want you if there'd never been a boy at all, and never a Ruth. And never a I'd want you empty-handed in the road with nothing to your name. That's the reason. The boy's just the second best reason I've got. She didn't answer right away, and in the not answering I watched 11 years of arithmetic run behind her eyes, the flinch, the bracing, the hunt for the trick, the second shoe. A man is being kind and kindness is a loan and the interest is cruel. I watched her get all the way to the edge of saying no, of protecting me from herself, of doing the sum where she came up short, and refusing me for my own good the way she'd been refused her whole life. "Say it again," she said, "the part about empty-handed." "I'd want you empty-handed in the road," I said, "with nothing to your name. Barren, they'd say. Uncertain circumstance, the county'd say. I'd say, there she is. That's the one. Been standing in the road with her arms open her whole life, and finally I've got the sense to stop the wagon." And she stepped into me and pressed her face into my shirt, and I felt her nod against my chest 3 times quick, like she didn't trust her own voice, and then her voice came anyway, muffled. "You're a slow fool, Eli Vance. Slowest in the territory. Took you 7 months. I'm careful with the things I don't want to weigh." She pulled back and looked up at me, and there it was, that look she used to cut off, the surprised young one, finished all the way this time and staying finished. "What does that mean, you don't want to weigh?" So I told her about the watch. The dead watch I keep and wind and never fix, that I've never once asked the worth of, because the things you love are the one place a man stops counting. And I watched her understand that I'd been telling her, in the only language I had, that I'd stopped counting her a long time ago. That to me, she'd never once been a sum. She married me 11 days later, in Cora's kitchen, with a circuit preacher and the boy holding the ring in his cornshuck doll's lap, because he wouldn't be parted from the doll and we wouldn't make him. Sits with Thunder came down off the ridge for it, which she did not have to do, and stood at the back. And afterward she took Della's 2 hands in her old ones and said something quiet in her own tongue that Della didn't understand and didn't need to. I asked her later what she'd said. Sits with Thunder gave me the look, the poor simple child look, one last time. I told her the empty basket and the full basket are woven on the same loom, she said. By the same hands. She will understand it when she is older. You will understand it when you are dead. And she almost smiled, which from her was a thunderclap, and she went back up the ridge, and I did not see her again until spring, which is a story I'm not going to tell you today. The court was in March. County seat, 2 days' ride, and I'll not pretend it wasn't the closest thing to war I've been in. The brother came from Missouri, Reed Carr, and here is the thing I had braced to hate and could not. He wasn't a bad man. That's the cruelty of it. There's no villain in the last part of this story, and that's worse than a villain because you can't beat a villain by being right. Reed Carr was a tired farmer with 4 living children and a dead brother he'd quarreled with and never made peace with, and he'd come all this way out of what looked to me like guilt, wearing the coat of duty. He wanted to do the right thing by Tom's boy. He truly did. And by every measure the county used: blood, a proven wife, a full house, land back east. He was the right thing. The judge was a dry old man named Halloran who'd seen every kind of human sorrow paraded through his room and had built a wall against it the way you build a wall against weather. He read the paperwork. Uncertain circumstance. Barren widow, recently married to a local rancher. And I watched him weigh that recently against me, weigh whether the marriage was a dodge, a thing built to game his court, and it was partly, and he knew it. And I had no way to prove the rest of it was true love and not a scheme. I'd prepared a speech, facts and figures the way I know how, acres and head and standing. I stood up to give it. And I couldn't. I stood there in that dry room in front of that dry man with my dry list of what I had, and I understood in one hot rush that the whole list was arithmetic, and arithmetic was the enemy's weapon, not mine. And if I fought Reed Carr with sums, I'd lose, because his sums were better. Blood beats acres. 4 living children beat 40 head of cattle. I had walked into the one room where being the one who counts would cost me the boy. So I put the list down. "Your Honor," I said, "I had a speech. It's got numbers in it. I'm good with numbers. I'm going to leave it in my pocket." Halloran raised one eyebrow, which from him was probably weeping. "I'll tell you a true thing instead, and you can weigh it however you weigh things. 2 months that boy didn't speak. Fever took his mother and father, and it took his voice with them, put it somewhere safe like his mother put him under the bed. And the doctors will tell you a voice like that comes back when a child trusts the room he's in. Not before. You can't force it. You can't earn it for him. You can't send him somewhere and order it back. I looked at Reed Carr when I said the next part, because he deserved to be looked at and not hated. He said his first word to my wife, in our yard, called her Ma. Not because she's blood she isn't and Mr. Carr is, and I won't stand here and pretend that counts for nothing, because it doesn't count for nothing, it counts for a great deal. But that boy has already done the one sum that matters. Out of a whole hard world that failed him, he picked the room he trusts. He picked her. He picked her. My voice went then, and I let it in front of the county, the loudest and most broken I've ever been. Your Honor, you can move a boy's body to Missouri. I don't think you can move where he decided he was safe. I think if you send him back into the silence. And I don't think the man who loved his brother, Reed Carr, flinched. I don't think that man wants to be the one who takes the boy's voice a second time. And I sat down, and the room was quiet the way the yard had been quiet. Halloran didn't rule that day. Said he'd take the night. And it was the longest night of my life, longer than the Fever house, and Della and I didn't speak, just sat in the boarding house room with the boy between us sleeping, his doll on his chest, and near midnight Della took out her tin. She opened it, took out the single booty, 12 years old, cream gone yellow. And then she took out the other one. She'd brought the wool, the needles, the one unpicked row, all this way in the tin with Ruth, and she cast on again. In the lamplight, in that terrible waiting room. If they take him, she said, so quiet, needles moving, I want to have finished something, just once. I want there to be one thing I got to finish. I didn't say a word. Sits with thunder's words in me. Do not go digging for a buried thing. I let her knit. Row after row, the second booty growing in her hands, the pair coming true after 12 years. And I understood she wasn't only making it for Ruth anymore. And she wasn't only making it for Job. She was making it for herself. For the 19-year-old in the Kansas dark who'd been told there'd be no more and had believed the doctors weather report her whole life since. She finished it at dawn, held the pair up in the gray light, 2 small booties matched at last. There, she said, emptied out. There, it's done. And whether she meant the booty or the grief or the whole 11 years, I couldn't have told you, and I didn't ask, because some sums you don't say out loud. Halloran gave us the boy. I'll not dress it up, he gave us the boy on conditions, and one condition was hard, and I'll tell you what it was, because leaving it out would be a lie, and Della doesn't abide lies. He ruled that the boy would stay with us. But he ruled that Reed Carr was to be written to twice a year with word of the boy, the truth, good and bad, and that if ever the boy, grown enough to know his own mind, wished to know his father's people, we were bound to help him find them. Blood wasn't to be erased, only outweighed. Reed Carr came to us after, turned his hat in his hands the way I do. I got 4, he said. I got 4, and I'm tired down to my boots, and I came out here half hoping you'd give me a reason to go home light. He looked at Job, who was hiding in Della's skirt and peeking out. That's a reason. He crouched down slow to the boy's height. He knew to do that. He was Tom's brother after all. There was good in the blood even if the blood hadn't come in time, and he said, You mind your ma now. You mind her good. And the boy, God help me, the boy said Ma and pointed at Della, proud, showing off his one word to this stranger. And Reed Carr's face did something private, and he stood up fast and shook my hand too hard and left. I liked him. That's the thing nobody tells you about the happy ending. Sometimes you win and the man you beat was good, and you carry that too in the tin with everything else. We came home in the melt, the wash running high again where it had all started, and I pulled the horses up at the same crossing where I'd gone in with my boots on 9 months before, and dragged a stranger's open hand out of the flood. Right there, I said, pointing, that's where I found you. Della looked at the brown water a long time. Job was asleep against her, doll and all, mouth open, snoring a little. He snored now. He made all the noise in the world now, it was glorious. And she said, not to me exactly. I thought that was the day my life ended. The wagon, everything I owned, gone downstream. I sat on that bank thinking, that's it, that's the last of me, I've got nothing left to lose now and nothing left to give. She shifted the sleeping boy. I had my arms full of a strange man's borrowed clothes, and I thought I was the emptiest woman in the territory. And she looked at me, that finished look, all the way finished, and it stayed. And I was standing in the road, she said, with my arms open. Wasn't I all that time? I just thought it was because I'd lost everything. A breath. Turns out it was so I'd be ready to catch what came through. I couldn't answer. Reached over instead and took out my father's watch. I'd started carrying it again, that spring, and I wound it out of habit, the dead watch that never ticks. And I don't know how to write this so you'll believe it, and I've stopped needing you to, because I was there and I know. It ticked. Once, just once. One tick in my palm in the melt light at the crossing where the whole thing started, and then it stopped again, dead as ever. And I have never gotten it to do it since. And I've told exactly 2 people this story, and one of them said it was the cold expanding the metal, and the other said it was God, and I think they're both wrong and both right. The way sits with thunder is always both, the empty basket and the full one on the same loom. I don't think the watch came back to life. I think it just wanted me to know it had been listening. All those years I wound a dead thing for love and asked nothing back. And love, it turns out, the real kind, the kind you stop counting, love keeps its own books. And every so often at a river crossing, with a sleeping boy and a woman who finished the row at last, it balances them. Just once, just enough. Della didn't see it. She was watching the boy sleep. I didn't tell her, sums you don't say out loud. I clucked the horses, and we crossed the water and went home, the 3 of